So our friend in the driver's seat has this popular girl trying to talk her into giving her a ride, and she knows it's a bad idea. Just then, in the next house, she sees a curtain move, and she remembers her favorite teacher lives there. Suddenly, she's not afraid of offending the girl as much as disappointing her teacher, who knows her parents and would know if this was a bad idea. "Sorry, but I'm not feeling very well myself now, and I'm in a big hurry. Maybe Mrs. C can help you," and she points to the house. The girl snorts and shakes her head. "It's okay, I can walk." Our friend drives away and shoots a smile toward her teacher's window. There's nothing like knowing somebody's watching to keep us sober. I remember back when I was a teenager sitting in church. There were times when I felt very tempted to do something I shouldn't, when I imagined up on the platform Brother Mitchell was glaring at me. I straightened up and all the thoughts of misbehavior went out of my head. Now, I know how silly that thought was, that he was glaring at me, but the imagined feeling of being watched dissolved any temptation to do what I knew I shouldn't. Last time we looked at Lot's wife and saw how much easier it is to let our good sense conquer our wild emotions when we stay where our authority can keep an eye on us. Lot's wife was able to give in to her urge to look back as she followed behind where her husband wasn't watching. We saw the power of an absent woman, how shameful things can happen when Mama's heart is not with her family. Before that, the Shunammite showed us the power of a hospitable woman. Through her habit of checking in with her husband and trusting that it shall be well, her rock-hard persuasion was rewarded with one of the greatest miracles in the Bible. And Eve showed us the power of a deceived woman to influence the world for evil until the end of time, and how God can transform even the bitterest regret into something so beautiful we're thankful it happened. Through each of these stories, I'm thrilled and terrified by the power of a woman's influence. One woman took a bite of fruit and shared it. One woman refused to believe anything but "it shall be well." One woman looked behind her, and the ripples spread out through the ages. Today we're going to look at the first of two women. One of them had it all and lost it. The other left it all and was blessed beyond her wildest dreams when she gave up her life to bless the first woman. Last time we heard the sad story how Lot's daughters were with child by their father. Both daughters bore sons. The descendants of the oldest child, Moab, multiplied into a child-butchering, fornication-worshipping nation that God called his washpot. This week we get to follow that genealogy down to the days of the judges. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. So the story starts out in the days the judges ruled. Those were crazy days of yo-yoing back and forth between following God and following the heathen. The children of Israel would sneak away little by little until their sin was so filthy God would allow the evil to catch up to them. As they felt the sting of a heathen king's lash, they'd cry out for mercy, and God would raise them up a deliverer, a judge. In one neighborhood, things got so bad around this time that the scene from Sodom was repeated almost word for word with an even more gruesome ending. Even many of the judges' own stories ended sad, like Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson. It was a hard time to be a woman. Still, because of the weak men of this period, some of the strongest women in the Bible show up in these pages, women like Jael, Deborah, and Jephthah's daughter. As each family in Israel struggled to take possession of their allotted chunk of the promised land, each family had to decide for itself whether it would also inherit and pass on the promises God had also made. God had given them a land of milk and honey, yes, but believe the promise that a Redeemer would come to bruise the serpent's head? Would they believe that? Was there any point to all the ceremonial laws they'd been commanded in the wilderness? Did it matter that their ancestors had been rescued from slaving in the brick pits? Each family had to decide. In Bethlehem, Judah, ties to the land ran deep. This wasn't just promised land. This was the very land Joseph's mother Rachel had been buried long before Jacob and his family had left to go to Egypt. Imagine your allotted portion landing in the exact area Israel himself had buried his beloved wife. All the promised land was special, but this place was legend. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. Every word in Scripture is profitable. Names were given for a reason. So let's look at these names. Elimelech means God is my king. So Elimelech apparently had God-fearing parents whose highest wish for their son was that he would love and serve the God of Israel. Naomi means my pleasantness. This lady was special. She was a delight. As we'll see, she had lived up to her name so much that when she returned, she was no longer pleasant. She knew the name no longer fit. More about that later. Mahlon means sick. Just think of that. Your parents give you the name God is my king, and you turn around and name your firstborn sick. It sounds like Elimelech was a pessimist. When the next baby came, he named him Chilion. It means pining. So maybe their babies weren't very strong. But Elimelech had a wonderful wife. He apparently had godly parents. He lived in one of the most important towns in the Promised Land. And they were Ephrathites. The word means fruitfulness. They were of the tribe of Judah, whom Jacob had promised would be praised by his brethren. And this man decides to leave. He's got a pleasant wife and sickly sons, and he decides their best chance of survival would be higher in a heathen land where at least there's a way to provide. He takes his wife and his 2 sons and heads to Moab, the nation conceived in that cave that first night when Lot's oldest daughter pulled out the wine. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. So here's this lady, Naomi. Her husband, it says, went down to Moab, and his wife and 2 sons. It reads to me like this was his idea. If it was his idea, I wonder how that set with pleasant Naomi. I believe she was a godly woman because almost every time we see her talking, she's talking about the Lord. So I wonder how this godly woman felt about her husband's decision to move from Bethlehem, Judah to Moab. I wonder if she wanted to change his mind. I wonder if she tried nagging and then quit as it made him dig his heels in. I wonder if she considered staying behind. She obviously didn't stick with it, if so. I wonder if she was heartbroken at leaving to go to a place like Moab, a place where abominations were worshipped, a place where grandbabies could be sacrificed in horrific rituals. I wonder if she feared how it would affect their impressionable, tender sons. Go to a place where no one knew or cared about the laws God had given Moses, where strange women could lure their hearts away from everything good and pure. I wonder if she felt like she had failed as a wife. I wonder if she could hear all the neighbors judging their terrible move. If she imagined future generations blaming her for such a wrong choice. I wonder if she just gave up in her heart, waited for the axe to fall, for judgment. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. He takes them to Moab, and boom, he dies. I wonder if she felt God had judged him, and maybe her too. I wonder if she was too ashamed to go back. What would people think of her as a wife of a man whom God had judged? I wonder if she was afraid to go back. If her husband couldn't provide for her there, how could she make it on her own with the famine? I wonder if she tried to go back, but her sons were too happy living in Moab. I wonder if she was too stunned to do anything. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelled there about 10 years. So they stay there. Sure enough, her sons choose Moabite women. She has to decide how to respond to these young ladies. Should she keep her distance? Should she love them Moabites that they are? They're going to have a huge influence on her sons. It appears she chose to love them. Ruth and Orpah are attached to this strange mother-in-law who talks about the God of the Hebrews in the land of Moab. She's a widow in a heathen land. Maybe she thinks God is angry with her and she doesn't know what to do to fix it. She feels stuck. She sees her heathen daughters-in-law and knows her sons may never want to go back. Those girls are anchoring them here, and her sons are her providers. She's just stuck. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Now she has nothing. She started out as a pleasant bride of a man whose name meant God is my king. They lived in a wonderful, fruitful, historic land with people who served God. Now she's alone. Moab's still filthy, and she's a bit harder for living in the filth. Her sons will never give her grandchildren. She has nothing except memories, an abandoned home far away, and 2 Moabite daughters-in-law. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Therefore she went out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return into the land of Judah. So Naomi has heard that the famine that sent them here in the first place is over. God has given his people bread. She's going home. It's interesting to me that her daughters-in-law immediately follow her. They were attached to her. She's precious to them, even as just a stranger there. She wasn't a nitpicking, sharp-tongued, eagle-eyed mother of their husbands. She hadn't condemned them for being heathen Moabites, it doesn't sound like. She welcomed them into her life, even though I'm pretty sure they were not the kind of brides she'd have picked for her sons. Maybe she felt guilty about that. But her daughters-in-law were attached to her. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. She lets them go part of the way. Then she tells them to return to their lands, their mothers. Without any thought of herself, she wishes them rest and remarriage. She will not be a burden to these young women. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. Maybe they've considered how hard it'll be for her to show up back home with nothing. At least then she'll have them to show for her trouble. At least she won't be completely wretched, and returning prodigal mothers will privately tell their children, Now see what happens when you leave the land God's given us? Just look at Naomi. You don't want to be like that, do you? And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters, while we go with me. Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay from them from having husbands? Naomi is completely focused on doing what's best for these girls. Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. This is her heart. She aches for her daughters that God is punishing her. That's really what she thinks. God's hand has gone out against her. I don't know if his hand was gone out against her. I don't know her heart. All I know is what God has recorded here. But I can't find anything she's done. Yes, I imagine she had sinned plenty like we all do. She'd probably fretted in Bethlehem when the famine started. She'd probably worried what the neighbors thought as they moved. Maybe she secretly blamed her husband for the judgment she feared was coming. Maybe after he died, she hated herself for blaming him. She may have privately grieved when her sons took wives in Moab. Maybe she didn't grieve and feel guilty. I don't know what sins she had committed. But I do know that God had good things planned for her. She'd forgotten God's desire to bless her because she'd been afraid of his wrath all this time. There's a verse I would have loved to short because it's helped me so much. For if our heart condemn us, God is greater than our heart and knoweth all things. 1 John 3:20. If our heart condemn us, God is greater than our heart and knoweth all things. Whether she was being chastened or not, I don't know. But I do know she did what she could. She headed back home. And she employed no guilt trips to get sympathy. She didn't invite anyone to go with her to share the punishment she felt was due. She sent them back to their own gods. And they lifted up their voice and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. But Ruth clave to her, and she said, Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people, and unto her gods. Return now after thy sister-in-law. I think this statement says a whole lot. It shows that life with Naomi equaled leaving their Moabite gods. It shows that both girls knew Naomi lived for the God of Israel. In her heart, she'd never left God. I think it might even show that she'd begun to win these girls over to the true God, since she points at Orpah's return to her gods. It shows how very low she'd gotten to send her daughters-in-law away from her, back to their own gods. It almost sounds like she's reached the end of hope that everything will turn out okay. Nothing has turned out okay. Might as well let the girls go where at least they have a home. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. Just look at that grace. When she hits rock bottom and tells Ruth to go to her old gods, God moves Ruth to refuse. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. I wonder what was going through Naomi's mind. What in the world are people going to think? I left her as a fruitful wife and mother. I return broken with nothing but a Moabite girl who thinks she has what it takes to live in the land of the 613 laws. But she wants to come, and she's coming. Oh well. It's obvious everything else has gone wrong. She may as well come. At least I won't be completely alone. But she'd be so much happier getting married again. What godly man wants to marry a Moabite girl? Everybody knows how Balaam and Balak sent Moabite women to trap the men of Israel. What if I'm bringing a stumbling block to bring her home with me? But she says she wants my God to be her God. She won't be a stumbling block. Well, this is just part of your medicine. All you can do is take it. So they too went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that all the city was moved about them, and they said, Is this Naomi? And she said unto them, Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? All Naomi can see is what she's lost. She's so broken she can't see someone precious is following her. Next week, Lord willing, we'll look at the story of Ruth. We'll see how God gave this precious girl a husband and a child. By the end of the story, Naomi's cuddling that long-awaited grandson, and God has even allowed her to be able to nurse the baby. What a miracle. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. Small miracles. They got there in the beginning of barley harvest. I wonder if Naomi can see the grace God was wanting to pour on her, that he would pour on her. She followed her husband to a heathen land, not because it was a wise move, but because he was her husband. We have no way of knowing whether God had led her husband there. But you know what? It's possible. Sometimes all a woman can do is be shoulder to shoulder with a man who needs her desperately. Sometimes all a woman can do is stand by her man. It's not right for me to judge Elimelech. I don't know what made him the Eeyore man he appeared to be. I don't deserve to judge any man. Naomi didn't deserve to judge her man. To his own master he would stand or fall. The Bible says the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. Our husbands' hearts are too. Sometimes, for whatever reason his wife may never know, a man becomes a pessimist like Elimelech, or a womanizer like David, or a husband who growls biting words that cut deep, or who gets fired, goes deep in debt, and files for bankruptcy, or has an addiction, or does jail time. Sometimes a man shouts amen to the preacher and shouts obscenities to the passing cars. Sometimes a man gets scared and rips a pleasant woman out of her comfortable home and takes her to live in a dump like Moab and then leaves her. Sometimes men are saints. Sometimes they're sinners. When they're saints, it's easy to take them for granted. When they're sinners, it's easy to wallow in shame. Just because a woman is married to a man who is not perfect doesn't mean that God is displeased with that woman. It doesn't mean she's not got an important place in the grand scheme of things. How she accepts her place is powerful. Whether she stands by her man as he is determines how history will roll for generations. Naomi's heart was turned toward the God she felt was angry with her. Even as she believed his hand was gone out against her, she rose up to return to him. Even though in the bitterness of her soul she tried to send her daughters-in-law back to their gods, the true God had mercy on her and caused Ruth to follow her anyway. In spite of her pain, God would have his way. He would bless her. From the beginning, Naomi would have to answer for herself. Would she follow her husband when people everywhere for millennia would judge her along with him? Would she accept her son's mates, even when they were nothing like she dreamed they would marry? Would she seek God when it looked like he'd planned an evil story for her? Naomi did. She chose pleasantness when it hurt. And through that choice, God was able to complete the plan he'd had in mind when he moved Elimelech to head east. Was Elimelech a believer? We'll find out one day. But it's obvious Naomi had faith because she was not ashamed in the end. In the end, she saw a provision much greater than she'd imagined in the house of wealthy Boaz. She would cuddle that precious grandson she'd longed for. That child would grow up to be a father of a little boy named Jesse, who would grow up to be the father of a little boy named David. Just think, David would have never been born if Naomi hadn't stood with her husband, if she hadn't loved her sons' wives, if she hadn't returned to Israel, if she hadn't believed on God. Naomi had no way of knowing the end of the story. As she walked away from her beloved home, with all the faithful neighbors whispering and maybe predicting gloom and doom, I wonder if she had any hope. When Mahlon announced he'd chosen a bride, I wonder if she felt old, useless, and forgotten as it became obvious they were staying in Moab. She couldn't know that Jesus wanted a Moabite girl in his family tree. And it took Naomi's pain to make it happen. He'd make it up to her. Naomi had no way of knowing that her story would be its own book in the eternal Word of God, and that it would be titled with the name of the Moabite girl her son chose. It had been written word for word since the foundation of the world. I'm not sure what God has written for my story or for your story, but I do know that our darkest moments and greatest hurts are the seeds he wants to bring forth life so amazing we would weep tears of joy to know it. All we need to do is believe and do the next thing. In the end of the story, there was a prophecy about that child that would be born. It was said, "He shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age." What a great description of what that child that would be born in Bethlehem way in the future would one day be to all of us. Every story is his story. Your story has a happy ending if you'll look to Jesus and trust your story with the author and finisher of our faith. He is our hope. It shall be well.